The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the universe to know itself. Carl Sagan.
Welcome to the Lessons from Nature podcast, modeling the secrets of the bees. Hosted by Mark Rubin.
If you hear my voice, you're alive. And if you're alive, you must be adaptable to many variables. Biological adaptability is the key to survival. I'd like to introduce my co-host, Hannah Mather. Hannah is a biologist, the connection to all living things. She's a bee influencer on Instagram at Hannah's Honeycomb. She takes amazing pictures of plants, insects, birds, and other animals and provides insightful comments along with cool music. Hannah will co-host the next 4 episodes with me, where we will discuss the secrets of the bees through the lens of the human business of making money and the bee business of making honey. The next 4 episodes will discuss the way that people and bees adapt to variability, competition, seasonality, and work. Today, we're going to talk about variability and how that variability drives adaptability. Welcome, Hannah. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be here. It's fun to talk about this.
I think so too, and I'm happy you're here. I'm going to do a quick summary of the previous first 4 episodes of this podcast to catch people up and also explain how those episodes relate to what we're talking about now. And I finished those episodes with my friend Chris Sparrow, who's an astrophysicist, and we discussed luck, energy, life, and time. The episode where we discussed luck describes the idea that conditions that support life are rare. There's a narrow temperature range for life to survive. And that's rare in our solar system, maybe the universe, who knows? But as far as we know, the only place that has life so far is this planet. The next chapter, Honey is Money, is that the sun sends us energy. And this solar energy powers all living things, including you. And the 4th episode is about time. And since it takes time to transfer energy, time costs energy. And time costs money, and time costs honey. And now we're at the part where we have the foundation for energy to come from a star to this planet, be converted into sugar, which is stored solar energy, and that sugar powers life. And now we're talking about biology and how biology reacts to the variability of that energy in our habitat, mostly because temperatures change on our planet, and that affects the availability of this energy. And this is true whether the energy source is money or if the energy source is honey. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how this idea relates to business and jobs and workers and money flowing. And Hannah's going to talk about it through the lens of the bees. And I'm going to give an example first about how variability of the temperature and weather of our planet affects money. And the first example of this that I have is of a hurricane. And unfortunately, hurricanes come through and affect, people and all living things. And in terms of a business, what happens is when a hurricane comes through, most of the businesses are closed for a while because of the damage the hurricane does to infrastructure. But the businesses that do well are the businesses that repair stuff. And what happens is when a hurricane comes through a habitat, it reduces the money flowing in that habitat, but it also concentrates the money by moving it to the people that can do work that matches the demand, which in this case is repairing things. And so, Hannah, what I want to ask you specifically is in terms of weather and hurricanes or other weather patterns that you can think of, how do the bees react to weather as it relates to both their ability to collect energy and also do repairs inside their hive, or any other way that may be interesting to talk about?
So much of the bees are weather dependent. You need enough rain so that the plants and the flowers can grow, but not so much rain that they can't leave their hives. So in case of a hurricane, when that comes in, and for example, in Florida, where they had really bad hurricanes this year, those flooded a lot of beehives and really wiped out colonies, thousands of them, and ones that we rely on for bringing out to California for the almond blooms and things like that. So some commercial beekeepers really had a big loss this year because of that. And that trickles down and impacts, the farmers as well. And so they will be able to rebuild, but it takes a little bit of time. So there was less bees that were available to bring out to California, and those bees were higher competition for those farmers to get.
Fascinating. So what you're saying is there was a hurricane in Florida, and the bees that are in Florida in these thousands of bee colonies are used to pollinate plants in California. So someone's getting paid to raise those bees, keep those bees healthy and growing in Florida, getting paid to physically take those bees and put them on a truck and then move those bees across the entire country so that we can pollinate plants that grow in California that rely on bees for pollination. If the bees are not alive, then these bees don't get moved. And then second of all, the people who are growing the almonds in California have fewer almonds because without pollination, they don't have a crop. And so this is a way that a hurricane can affect the availability of money and also the availability of honey across an entire country. And that's just one really good example. How can we make up those bees? I know you said it takes time. If sugar was available in Florida and could be brought there, would that help feed the bees that survived in a way that would enable them to grow faster so that there could be more pollinators moved around?
Yes. So supplemental feeding to those bees help them grow, and then as well as bringing in bees from other parts of the area that weren't impacted as harshly. So a lot of people came in to help those beekeepers, and they're rebuilding, but it definitely takes community, and nobody could do that on their own.
And that is a good example of adapting to variability, is that human beings are adapting to a variable condition that occurred. That's really interesting. So thanks for sharing that. So my business has a lot of trucks that burn fuel. Sometimes this fuel is expensive, and sometimes it's not even available at all. A couple times in the last 25 years, I think there were 2 or 3 times where I couldn't get fuel, diesel fuel, in the beginning, and now I switched over to gasoline later. When fuel was not available, and we had to actually buy siphons and do work to move it from the fuel tanks of the trucks we weren't using into the trucks that we were using. And we reacted to the variability and the just like the sugar example for the bees. This is the fuel is the sugar of my trucks, and also the energy in the fuel from my trucks did come from the sun, just like the energy in the sugar. And so that's an example of being adaptable from an energy perspective, a local level. And I know that bees store energy in their beehive in the form of honey. And I watch them because I have an observation hive, and I see them moving it around inside the hive. And I also observe when I look at the frames that it's in different places, different times. Can you talk a little bit about, in the same way that I move fuel between trucks for different reasons, do the bees make decisions around where the honey's located inside their hive based on similar ideas?
Yes, they definitely have certain places that they put the honey that best suit them at different times of year. So when the nectar is coming in and they have so much of it, they'll store it kind of away from the brood body of the hive where they're growing the new bees. They'll store it farther up where they can access it later. But as they need it, they'll also bring it closer to that brood nest so that they can pull it in very quickly and easily for the baby bees that are growing and things like that. And especially in winter time, they'll want it close so that they don't have to go too far and break out of that warm circle that they have going on. So it depends what time of year where they want that. energy source, whether they're able to go that extra box up and go a little bit farther away to access it, or whether they need it right next to them.
So what I'm hearing you say, you said time of year, but really it's not time of year, it's temperature.
It's definitely temperature dependent, because the colder it is, the closer they want their resources.
That's right. And I'll say two things about that is number one, in the springtime, the bees tend to put the surplus honey, the profit. So basically, this is the honey that's not the working capital. This is the extra honey. They stick it in the top box on the top. To your point is there's a balance between the size of the brood chamber, which is where they create the baby bees, and the energy storage capacity of the hive. And they also put the excess honey, the surplus honey, the furthest away from the opening at the bottom for defensibility, because any marauding bees that would want to steal that delicious honey would have to fight their way through all of the other bees. And to your point, temperature in the hive is variable. And it's warmest where there's the most bees. Bees create heat. And they're converting the energy from the sun in the form of sugar into vibrations. And that creates the heat inside the hive. And the further they have to go away to get that energy, the colder they get. They could die on the way. If it's too far away, they'll freeze before they bring it back. The idea is that time is honey and time costs energy. And the colder it is, the more energy it costs. So you need to reduce the time. And so by storing it the closest to where they need it, they reduce that time, which reduces the energy costs. And that's a parallel that I have in business. Let's talk about the worker count to match the variability of money in a habitat. And similarly, in business, energy in the form of money is not available all year round in the same amounts. In the same way that the flowers are not available all year round, different proportions. And it's important in a business to manage this curve of energy availability and the number of workers that are collecting it. And this is done in models and also done through planning. And I'm planning in advance. I plan a year in advance to match the variable conditions of headcount needed to do the business I'm in, junk removal business that I'm in. And I notice in the winter, 20% of the bees that I see in the winter is what I see in the summer, or something like that, approximately. And so that must mean that the bees are reacting to this variability as well. So can you talk a little bit about how the bees are adjusting their population to match the energy that's around them?
So we can start kind of in spring when they're first starting to build up from the winter. As some of the worker bees start bringing in nectar and pollen, that gives cues to the queen to lay more eggs. And as she lays more eggs, that increases the worker population exponentially. And so it goes up, so that there's as many workers as possible to go out and collect that nectar and pollen while it's available. And then throughout late summer through fall, those cues of the nectar and the pollen coming in, it kind of declines a bit, and that cues her to lay less eggs so that there's less mouths to feed over the winter when they're conserving the resources. And so that at that point, it kind of goes into the bare bones population of what they need to keep each other warm and sustain a population throughout the winter based on what they have stored and what they can feed. And then in the spring, it starts all over again.
Bees take, 21 days from egg to bee? Okay. So there's some latency in this, is that the signaling, if it took a year, okay, for this to happen, it wouldn't work, right? If the reproductive cycle of a bee was too long, it wouldn't work. So shorter would be better. But it takes a certain amount of time to grow a living thing, and that's probably the shortest it could take given the mass of a bee. And so is there a way, I have pollen patties that I have fed the bees earlier in the season, a month before the flowers are available. And that stimulates the queen bee to start laying eggs a little sooner. Is that right?
Yes, supplemental feeding of the pollen and sugar syrup to replace the nectar definitely does give them cues to start a bit sooner. And that's beneficial so that right when the blooms start, you already have a little bit of a stronger population. So that's where a beekeeper, knowing that, can help give their bees a boost and kind of set them ahead.
I did that last year in a new habitat that I was unfamiliar with a lot of beehives. And I didn't have a chance to keep up with it. And then it got real cold for about a month. And I think that was bad because I didn't react to the variable conditions in a way that was advantageous for the bees. And I lost a lot of hives because they starved. And they grew, I believe, this is a theory. Like, I'm a new beekeeper. I am not an expert beekeeper. To all the beekeepers out there, I'm not an expert. I am brand new at this. But it seemed like the population ramped up. Availability of sugar and pollen in the habitat wasn't there yet. And I think that caused a decline in their population until it caught back up. But by the time it caught back up, there wasn't enough worker bees to catch up. That's kind of like in a business of overhiring too early and hiring a ton of people before the revenue is there. And then you start burning through all your money and then realizing you made a mistake and then having to let people go to save the business. But then when the business comes back, not having the 21 days to hire them, because you can't hire people. My hiring cycle is 21 days, by the way. So basically, same problem is that there's curves in this variability, curves of energy and resources and curves of worker headcount. And if the curves don't line up, it can be a mess.
It's definitely nuanced in beekeeping and business. So whenever you take a gamble like that, it could pay out big or it could make things harder for you.
That's right. And I'm just imagining in the example you gave before with the hurricane, if thousands of beehives were destroyed, what happened to the workers that were taking care of them? Where did the money come from to pay them? What happened to all those jobs? How quickly could that problem be solved with either sugar or money flowing in to try to keep it going? Because if we lose those jobs and people have to make money to live and they get other jobs and people don't come back to those jobs, then we're in trouble in terms of pollinating food that keeps us alive. Do you know what % of food comes from pollinators? Any idea?
It's about 1/3 of the food that we eat.
Wow.
The vegetables that we eat are pollinated by bees.
Amazing. 1/3. Yeah. So would it be true then if bees disappeared, then the human population would decline?
Definitely can be said that. And at least our nutrition options would definitely decline. And bees, insect pollinators contribute over $20 billion to our economy because of how of the food yields increase that they provide. So it's not just kind of a metaphor that how much we rely on them. It really impacts a lot of our economy.
Is that $20 billion just in the US or is that all over the world?
That's in the US.
Okay. So it's got to be a lot more.
Don't quote me on that number, but there is.
Oh, I was.
Yeah.
I was taking.
It is over. It is the billions.
Billions. Yeah, I'm sure. And I'm sure in other ways too, because of not just the food increase in food, but the increase in jobs, all aspects of growing things that create energy that's moved around and sold. It affects everything. But bees are also all pollinators. But in the example we're talking about with the bees is the effects of not just making honey and converting it into money, but all the tangible benefits of living in harmony with nature in a way that benefits habitat creation and all living things. And, I guess it's important to consider not just the money, but all of it together, because we're all on one rock going around a star at 19 miles per second. So it'd be good if we had a bigger view of this. Okay, let's talk about snow specifically. Where I live outside DC, it snows sometimes, although not in the last couple of years. When it snows, my trucks don't leave the office because they don't work well in the snow. And so the workers stay home. And this is true for a lot of businesses. So the inverse of this is a snowplow company. Okay, so their workers are busy when it snows, but not when it's not. I have a pool in my backyard, and I have a pool company that does stuff for the pool. And in the winter, they're only here for maybe, I don't know how many months, 4 or 5 months a year, taking care of the pool. Landscaper, all these different things that occur in seasonality. These businesses are reacting to variables. So specifically in terms of cold, we touched about this a little bit in terms of inside the hive. But do the bees even leave the hive at all in the winter when it's, let's say it's below freezing out? Like, do they even like poke their little heads out and look around, or are they in there stuck?
If it's below freezing, they're huddled together in the middle of the brood chamber, just keeping warm and consuming enough honey to survive and to keep warm. They're kind of in like a slow state. But if it does rise a little bit, like to the 40s to 50s, they'll sometimes exit the hive just to go to the bathroom and clear and come back. But for the most part, all winter long, they're kind of hunkered down.
In the winter, when it's below freezing, if it was always below freezing for 6 months out of the year, let's just say, they would have to have 6 months worth of honey in the hive, given the number of bees and the temperature and the insulation or whatever, sunlight, who knows, to maintain their temperature so they can make it through the cycle to the spring of the next year when it gets warmer. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
So similarly, the pool company has to have, I'm guessing, 7 or 8 months worth of money so that they can make it through the winter, because the pools are closed. So there's no money coming in. And in the case of the landscaper, similar percentages of the year. My business is seasonal too. The junk removal business is seasonal too, because it's tied to when people are moving. But the snow plow business has the opposite. And that would mean that they would have to have enough people and equipment in the winter. I had a business called Duty Calls, which was a pet waste removal business for dogs. And it had the opposite curve of the junk business. I added that business to my business with the same office, same manager, same setup, because of the variability of the seasonality curve. And I was able to maximize both utilization of the same people, basically use the same people to do different things, to keep them busy and employed. While one business was slower, the other business was busier. And it also sort of maximized the utilization of my office and trucks. And that's an example of being adaptable to variability, and then using the variability in an advantageous way to try to maximize profitability across the thing. And that'd be like, what could the bees do in the winter? I don't know. Maybe they could make like super fancy honeycomb. I don't know what they could do. But humans are more adaptable because we have the ability to control our temperature through heating and cooling in different ways and trading for money for those things. So it's an advantage that we have. Well, one more thing to talk about variability is the variability of in my business, the junk removal business. I have customers. Every day, trucks leave an office and they go out and they gather this energy called money from these customers scattered about in my habitat, different places. I don't get to pick where they are. If I could pick where they were, they would all be next to my office, which is right next to the transfer station where we bring the material. And I would drive 5 feet that was back and forth all day. Unfortunately, or fortunately, they're spread out over, the 30, 40 mile radius from my office, which is in the exact middle of this territory. That's where I put it, because time is honey. And so, but what happens is on a day, I might have 50 to 100 customers to go pick up their junk. And they're scattered around it in different ways. And so what we try to do is optimize the routes, which means a truck could maybe do 5 or 6 jobs in a day. And we try to figure out what would be the fastest way, taking the least amount of time to cover every house, even though people schedule at a certain time. So when I look around where I live, there's flowers all over. It seems pretty random, variable, I would say, not random, but variable. And the bees, I imagine, are doing some kind of calculation or optimization based on where the hive is, where the flowers are, how far the flowers are, maybe other things, Can you talk a little bit about how the bees do some similar optimizations to what I do with money?
Yes, definitely. So bees can forage on average about 2 miles away from their hive,
Hmm.
but the closer they can find a resource, the better. So that way they're not burning the energy on the way there and back. But in addition to just the distance from the hive, what they look for is clusters of flowers. So flowering trees like have hundreds and hundreds of flowers on one tree. And that's why you'll find those covered in honeybees, because they can optimize going to the most flowers that are right next to each other and bringing that back to the hive. And when a few bees or one bee, they find a really good source like that, where it's a bunch of clusters of nectar rich flowers, they'll come back to the hive and communicate via a waggle dance to tell the other members of the hive where to go. And so they even they'll have some nectar that they'll have the other bees sample as they're doing their waggle dance, that they know what they can get and where to go to get it. And then they'll send out more worker bees to that same location to really optimize any good sources that they find. And that's why that's one of the things when you're planting for pollinators to keep in mind, that instead of planting, one type of flower here, one type of flower there, that it's most beneficial to plant groups of the same flowers in different places, because that's what they look for, and because that helps optimize the nectar that they're able to bring in.
This is a really fascinating one. I'm going to start in the reverse order. I've noticed inside the hive, when the bees bring in pollen, the pollen's grouped together, meaning that the colors of the pollen are similar in different parts of the honeycomb. Is that because when the bees go find this source of pollen, in this case, and bring it back, are all the bees coordinating where to put that pollen from the same source in the same spot in the hive?
I don't know if it's as much internal coordination of where they're putting it as much as they're probably all collecting it at the same time, like the same day. So then that's kind of where they're filling in first before they move to somewhere else as they find a new source.
So really what it is, the capacity. So it's the opposite. So basically there's capacity in the hive in a certain spot because of whatever the reason, the variability inside that. We even talked about that, the variability inside the hive. Like at some point there's an opening over here for stuff. And that's more. So they're not deciding. It's more of like where could they put it?
Yes.
It makes sense. And I can to give you an example in the junk business is, a truck could drive 40 miles to pick up one mattress from somebody's house for $100, let's say. Or that truck on the way back from picking up this mattress could go by an estate sale. And on the estate sale, there could be like 10 truckloads worth of junk sitting on the driveway that no one's going to buy. And that worker will get on his phone, which does a little waggle dance to somebody else who's inside the hive and say, send 10 trucks over here. And that's way more efficient to concentrate the work where the honey is, except it's called money, and get it together than it is for individual workers to do small jobs. Better to have a group of people doing big jobs because of the variability, which is the same as them. They have a capacity unit called a bee day, and I have a capacity unit called a truck day, which is I have one truck that has a certain capacity for one day and has 2 people. And the trucks fill up, just like the bees fill up. Trucks fill up and bees fill up. And if you have multiple trucks in one spot, you can distribute weight and space in a way that's optimal and also reduce time, because you reduce round trips if you do it this way. And they're doing the same thing for the same exact reason. And your example was beautiful because it exactly matches the same situation for the same reason. It's more efficient to have lots of workers in one spot because you can rebalance the resources across the team of people. We're going to get into the waggle dance when we get to honey talks. So this was fascinating. So I'm going to open it up now, Hannah, to sort of whatever you think. Are there any other variables that you think would be worth discussing and how bees react to their habitat, like other things that would be useful to discuss?
Well, I think that one of the advantages of honeybees is how well they do adapt to different resources and all different types of flowers, whether that's flowering trees or dandelions or many different kinds of species that grow. And that's kind of one of their advantages over some other native species that are specialized. So there's a lot of bees out there that can only feed off of certain flowers because their proboscis, which is like a tongue that they suck the nectar from, is a certain shape. And so the longer the proboscis, the longer flowers that they can forage from. Their anatomy correlates with flower anatomy. And, that's one of the reasons why it's so important to plant many diverse types of flowers so that we can protect all of the pollinators. But then on the flip side, that's also one of the reasons why honeybees are so beneficial to agriculture and our economy, because they are able to withstand the changing landscapes with more resilience than some of the other species. And some honeybees have adapted where they will actually kind of cut a little hole in the flower closer to the where the nectar is produced, and they can get nectar through that.
That's a great optimization, a way to adapt the flower to their bodies versus being forced to adapt their bodies to the flower, which takes longer periods of time. Well, Hannah, this was really fascinating, and I appreciate all your insights about the biology of honeybees and how they react to variable conditions. So thank you for sharing this knowledge with us. All living things are reacting to variables, and the fact that you're alive means that you're good at it. Humans are changing our global habitat at a rate that makes it increasingly difficult for all living things to adapt. And this includes the destruction of habitat. This also includes the reduction in water resources, pesticide use, roads, dams, and burning old sunlight and increasing the amount of carbon in the air. It's important to consider that everything we do, everything that every living thing does, affects other living things. If you enjoyed this discussion about variability, please subscribe to this podcast, Lessons from Nature, Modeling the Secrets of the Bees. See you on the next episode, where Hannah and I will be discussing competition. All living things compete for energy, and we're not playing the game of life alone. Visit projecthoneylite.life for more information about living in harmony with nature. I'm Mark Rubin. See you next time.